Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. If you've spent any time at all looking at gaming news lately, you've probably had this very specific, very loud narrative shoved into your feed. You know the one. The idea that the Nintendo Switch 2 is just this massive, stumbling failure. Well, today, we are going to objectively compare this prominent doom and gloom narrative directly against Nintendo's actual, official, publicly available fiscal data. We're going to literally put the sensational headlines right next to the spreadsheets.
We have a ton of fascinating data to cover today. First, we'll look at the Switch 2 narrative itself, then fact-check the global and US sales. After that, we'll explain the recent price hikes, unpack that weird stock market disconnect, and finally, weigh all this clickbait against the hard data.
All right, Section 1, the Switch 2 narrative.
So, over the last few months, the popular content creator Nintendeen has heavily framed the Switch 2 as a catastrophic failure. I mean, a direct title from one of his recent videos claims the console had a terrible ending to its first year. It's driving this narrative of panic, totally designed to make you think the console is dead on arrival. But well, what actually happens when we look at the real earnings report from Nintendo for fiscal year 2026?
Boom. Nintendo's actual net sales for FY 2026 hit a truly staggering 2.3 trillion yen, and that is up 98.6% year over year. Let me just repeat that real quick. Their revenue essentially doubled. This sharply contradicts the whole claim of a terrible ending. Honestly, it's just an outright falsehood to frame a year where a company literally doubles its revenue as a failure.
Moving on to Section 2, fact-checking global sales.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we can directly compare the goalposts set by these doom narrative videos against the actual unit sales reported by market trackers. Earlier in the console's life cycle, the narrative claimed a hard ceiling of 15 million units for the first year, but Nintendo's official data, it shows an astonishing 19.86 million units sold in just its first 300 days on the market. That's right, it didn't even have a full 12 months to hit nearly 20 million units. This is a classic textbook example of goalpost shifting. When the console absolutely shatters the early predictions, the narrative simply ignores the success to keep the outrage going.
And the sheer scale of that success is just massive. The Switch 2 didn't just beat the original Switch's phenomenal first year of 15 million units, it completely eclipsed the entire lifetime sales of the Wii U, which sat at 14 million, in less than 10 months. That is wild.
To downplay these massive numbers, another video claimed that roughly 1/3 of all buyers are in Japan, kind of implying the console is failing globally and only being propped up by its home country. But the objective reality straight from Nintendo's financials tells a totally different story. A massive 77% of revenue actually came from outside of Japan. The framing that it's struggling globally is just mathematically incorrect.
Section 3, the US market reality.
A crucial part of this whole narrative relies on regional performance, particularly in the West, where videos have repeatedly claimed the console was performing below expectations. We see titles declaring weak US sales and slashed production. But data from Circana, the premier video game market tracking firm in the US, they reported a massive 5.9 million US install base for the Switch 2 in its first 12 months alone.
To really put that 5.9 million into perspective, far from being weak, the Switch 2 is literally the second fastest-selling hardware in US tracked history. We are talking data dating all the way back to 1995. The only console to ever sell faster in the United States is the Game Boy Advance. Calling the second fastest-selling console of all time weak is pretty much textbook misinformation.
Section 4, explaining the price hike.
So this brings us to the recent price revisions, which is a major point of contention that's been framed super disingenuously as a panic move. One video titled "Nintendo Increases the Switch 2 Price After Suffering One of Its Worst Quarters" actually attempts to link the price hike to poor performance. But in reality, FY 26 saw operating profit increase by 106.7%. Framing a quarter that contributed to a massive jump like that as a worst quarter is just an outright falsehood. The financial reality of that reporting period features record-breaking metrics across the entire board. Check this out. Net sales hit 2.3 trillion yen. Operating profit reached 360.1 billion yen. Net income was up 51.3%. This massive financial engine was driven by over 48.7 million software sales, heavily anchored by the powerhouse that is Mario Kart World. A failing company just doesn't post a 106% jump in profit.
So, if it wasn't poor sales, why the price hike in the US, Japan, Canada, and Europe? Well, according to Nintendo and independent market analysts, the price revisions are entirely due to verifiable global supply chain factors. We are talking about ongoing memory component shortages, skyrocketing production costs, and increased logistics expenses. It's a macroeconomic reality, not a desperate bid to save a sinking ship.
Section 5. The stock market disconnect.
Okay, this is the most nuanced part of the narrative, and honestly, where the doom and gloom finds its most convincing, yet deeply flawed ammunition. You might be wondering, if the console's doing so brilliantly, why did Nintendo's stock drop 40%? Well, consumer success and stock market reactions don't always align perfectly. The console launched in June 2025. By March 2026, it hits that incredible 19.86 million sales mark. But then, in May 2026, shares dropped 9% almost overnight when the fiscal results, future guidance, and price hikes were all announced simultaneously.
And this right here is where we see lies by omission in action. The clickbait videos point to the stock drop as absolute proof the console is failing, but they totally ignore the actual market drivers. Investors reacted to Nintendo's conservative FY27 projection of 16.5 million hardware units, which is a totally natural expected decline after a record-breaking launch. Investors also hesitated regarding how consumers would react to the price hikes, and crucially, Nintendo's FY26 lacked the massive movie revenue boost seen in the prior year. Why? Because the new Super Mario Galaxy movie released in April 2026, literally just after this fiscal year ended. Ignoring these complex market realities creates a completely false narrative of failure.
Section 6. Clickbait versus hard data.
Throughout this explainer, we've seen exactly how actual data can be twisted, omitted, or entirely ignored to serve an algorithm that honestly just feeds on negativity. So, I'll leave you with this provocative thought. When the numbers tell an undeniable story of record-breaking success, nearly 20 million consoles sold, a 106% jump in profit, the second fastest-selling console in US history, but the headlines in your feed are screaming disaster, how will you choose to stay informed moving forward? It's a really vital question for all of us navigating today's media landscape. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.